Hello, my name is Phil Thompson and I'd like to welcome you to my garden railway here in South Yorkshire. I started building the railway in 2006 and it's still a work in progress. I don't know how many more years it'll take me to finish, but hopefully one day it will be nearly finished, but I do hope never completely finished. Currently the railway is about 60 metres from end to end, and at its widest point it's about 15 metres wide, but the garden extends for a further 15 or 16 metres, and well, if I'm lucky enough, one day the railway will extend even further. So let's look upon it as being just over half completed for now. The name of the railway is the Great Willowgarth Railway, and I'll explain in a moment where that name comes from. Behind me you'll see a body of water. This is called locally the Willowgarth and gives the name to my railway. The Willowgarth is a medieval moat, or the remains of a medieval moat. It comprises today a rectangle of water surrounding a small island, the island being about 20 by 25 metres. Off to my right, beyond the trees, is the remains of a fish pond, filled in some centuries ago, I believe, but you can still see the outline of it. And together, the moat and the fish pond are a scheduled ancient monument, which does limit what I can do with the area around here. For example, I can't build my castle on the island, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to continue living in the bungalow. The moat and the fish pond were associated, I believe, with a priory, which is just a few hundred metres up the hill from here. And to give you an idea of how close the moat is to the railway, if I simply pan around through 180 degrees, there we are. From this vantage point you get quite a good idea of the railway layout, although you might just see the white sails of that windmill, and the track does actually continue for around about another 25 metres past that point. But once you're up here, the track continues around to a small-ish circuit here and a station just the other side of those nearer two trees. And from the rather nice miniature tree to the right, there's a branch line that continues downhill back under the main line and over to the other side of the garden. There it continues just this side of the hedge to a reversing loop which ends just by that rather decrepit blue shed. I'm pleased to say the blue shed is not going to be around for much longer. And here we are at the priory, or how it looks today. The land hereabouts was granted by William the Conqueror to Roger de Bussley, one of his followers, soon after the Norman conquest. Later the land passed to William de Lovetot, whose father had sailed with William the Conqueror in 1066. History records a church here by 1111, founded by William de Lovetot. By 1142, the village and church had been given to St Wandrel Abbey, which is near Fontenelle in Normandy, and an abbey which still exists today. By 1161, there was probably a small priory on the site, occupied by monks from St Wandrel. Sadly, history is silent on when and who dug out both the moat and the fish pond, but it's a fair guess that it was these medieval monks, which would mean the moat in my garden is probably around 800 years old. To complete the story, Richard II threw out the monks from St Wandrel in 1386, giving the church and priory to the monks of Coventry. Henry VIII then gave the land to the Earl of Shrewsbury on dissolution of the monasteries in 1539. The land then passed in marriage to the Duke of Norfolk in 1616. And 389 years later, I bought the moat from the present Duke of Norfolk. Well, that was the end of the history lesson. Now it's time to play trains. But I suppose I should point out that as we go round the track, you'll see the names of the stations, and they're all influenced by the history of the place that I've just told you about. So, what are we running today? Well, do meet Lady Hannah Jane. She is a model to 16mm scale of an NGG 16 Garratt built for the South African Railways. Wheel arrangement 262 plus 262. The model was constructed by Accuraft and I've had it some years. I bought it second hand. I'm afraid to say it was not in the best of conditions when I bought it. Needed a little bit of fettling, a bit of TLC, but now it's running really well. So, what can I tell you about it? Firstly, in the rear bunker we have an enlarged gas tank. I'm afraid that the regulator does stick a little bit above the top of the bunker, but I can live with that. Next, of an unusual feature, there is a water separator. You can just see the screw underneath there. That is used to stop any back pressure from the exhaust water condensing on its way to go out through the chimney. And if I look down inside, what you'll see is no servos. That's because this loco is a manual control with a manual regulator and a manual reversing wheel. Turn it one way and it goes in reverse. Turn it the other way quite a few turns and it will go forwards. Today we have a train of goods wagons. I'm afraid they're all empty. It's not very much of a revenue earning train, but it gives a reasonable load for the locomotive. There's 32 axles here. As you can see, steam is starting to emerge from the safety valve, so we're not too far from setting off. Well, we're up to pressure, so let's set off. At Foster's End station, we're about halfway through our journey, so I'm going to pause now and look back at some of the features of the line that the train has passed. We're setting off today from Fountains station. It has 4 through roads and 2 sidings for steaming up. As the train departs in this direction, it enters a gradient 1 in 80 upwards, and then the line swings to the left onto a bridge. I built this bridge around 20 years ago for my previous garden railway. It's made of aluminium. In those days you could go around a non-ferrous scrapyard, which is what I did, and pick up all sorts of bits and pieces of aluminium to build a bridge. Sadly, I don't think you could do that nowadays. Health and safety, I'm sure, would put a stop to that. There are 3 piers to the bridge which are cast in concrete in situ. It's now surrounded by plants, although when I first built it there weren't that many. Immediately after the bridge there's a passing loop with sprung points at both ends. The sprung points at this end I'm particularly proud about because, well, I made them by accident. The points themselves were originally came from Markway models in Sheffield, and unfortunately the tie bar became unsoldered at one point, so I soldered it back again. But completely by accident, what I managed to do was to create a set of sprung points. They automatically spring so that the trains are diverted to the right. Brilliant! I only wish I could repeat it. I've not yet managed it though. At the other end of the passing loop, the line enters a shelf section. This was built by first of all building the shelf and then putting the earth around it. So the opposite way to what would happen in the real world. However, it does look a lot like many a shelf where a narrow gauge railway might run on a hillside. And here we are, passing through Busley Junction. The station was originally intended to have a platform, but then I discovered that actually the platform will be in the way of the lawnmower and of people trying to get to the middle of this loop that you see ahead. So for now there is no platform. Maybe one day, maybe one day. Leaving Busley, the gradient steepens to 1 in 60. And at the top of that is a triangular junction. Unfortunately, one of the routes has been ruined by a real rockfall. One day, when I build the extension you might just see in the distance, I'll repair the track, but for now it'll have to stay as it is. And here we have the station, the train entering Lovetot station, of which more in a moment. Here we are at Lovetot station, the largest station on the railway. There are 4 roads passing through the station and 1, 2, 3, 4 sidings. It gets a very busy place on open days, with plenty of people wanting to use the tracks here to steam up. Added to the complications, there are 2 roads at one end of the station, 2 ways in and 2 ways out at the other end. And by a complicated system of points, which includes 2 diamond crossovers, a single slip and a double slip, it's possible to get from any one of the incoming roads to either of the 2 outgoing roads and pass through any of the 4 roads running through the station. The train is now heading out of Lovetot, passing over the double slip and heading off down the branch. And here we are at the lifting bridge. The bridge is required to give access to the far end of the garden. It's built of aluminium, which this time I ordered online. And it's painted in South Yorkshire Passenger Transport Bus Stop Blue, which is the signature colour of all of the bridges on this railway. It works quite simply. Hinged at one end, it will simply rest in position when not required, and is very quick to put back in place when needed. The hinges, by the way, are bronze bushers which are just let into the aluminium. This bridge provides a visual break along the line, as well as a break in the gradient, which along the hedge line here runs at a steady 1 in 60, at least providing I got my levels right. The bridge, as you'll see, has stone arches at both ends and a bowstring bridge, again in the signature blue colour, between the two arches. I found the arches in a yard selling reclaimed stone, and decided there and then that I really had to have them, and then worked out later how I would use them. The arches themselves are a little bit too narrow on their own. They're about that width for use as an arch bridge, and so I had to join pairs of stone arches together in order to construct the bridge. To do that, I used a special epoxy intended for gluing stone together, and stainless steel pins let into and glued into each side of the arch. Just a case of carefully lifting one arch, joining it to the other, and then crossing fingers and hoping that the epoxy did the job of holding the two together, which I'm pleased to say has worked really well. As you can see, at Foster's End I've started to build a stone cladding to the concrete block walls used to support the station. There are many days' work required to finish this off, and temporarily I've just lost the enthusiasm to continue building. In fact, I lost the enthusiasm a few years ago, which is why you can see there's now moss growing on the outside of the concrete blocks. And this is how Foster's End got its name. The intention is to build this headstone into that stone wall facing the station. In case you're wondering, no, I'm not a grave robber. This is the headstone of my wife's grandfather, who sadly died before she was born. The story goes a bit like this. The grave was in a rather badly tended graveyard, and over the years the headstone got knocked over and grass began to grow over the surface of the headstone. My mother-in-law got a little bit upset about this because, well, she'd paid for the headstone and it had been paid for at a time when money was tight. So she felt that something should be better done with the headstone. So one day, 2 or 3 of us drove into the graveyard, parked alongside the grave, took out a pick and a shovel and dug up the headstone. Then, carefully, we lifted it into the back of the car and drove away. And you know, nobody attempted to stop us. Nobody even came, wondering what on earth it was we were doing. Here we are at the shed, a major project from last year and continuing into this year. The shed comprises a storage space, a small kitchen for use in making hot drinks primarily, and a sitting in area with extra storage. It's meant to look like the sort of small station that you might find on a small narrow gauge railway. It still has the, if you like, platform to put outside, which is going to be a piece of decking which will be useful when it comes to sitting outside in the sunshine and watching the trains go by. Here at Foster's End we now start the upwards gradient, so time to put a little bit more regulator on. fountains well. Here we are at St Wandrell Station, which was originally built in 2006. Unfortunately, the retaining wall, which was in a slightly different position to the retaining wall here, then burst. So I got a builder to come and put a new retaining wall in place. Unfortunately, as you'll see here, the new retaining wall has also burst. So that also needs to be fixed. I think it's something to do with all the heavy clay in the soil hereabouts. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this visit to my railway and the journey along the line. In a normal year, we might have at least 3 open days when members of the 16mm Association are welcome to come and play with their trains, operate their trains on the railway. Of course, in 2020 that hasn't been possible, but we do hope that in 2021 everything will get back to normal. If you want to find out when the open days are going to be, well, the 2021 issue of 16mm Bulletin should have all of the dates. Something to look forward to, I hope. And I hope the other thing that you'll look forward to is visiting the Yorkshire Garden Railway Show in 2021. The venue is booked at Elsica, and all we need now is for life to get back to some degree of normality. Fingers crossed. All the best. Goodbye now.